And in the studio with me for this first hour, the BBC trustee for England, Alison Hastings, who's a journalist through and through, started out on local newspapers in Hertfordshire, worked for Thomson Regional, became head of editorial staff development for their regional operations in Newcastle. Newcastle Evening Chronicle then beckoned. She became editor at a very young age of 29 and built a very good reputation in that paper for investigative and campaigning journalism. After a number of years in the very competitive world of regional press, during which she was appointed to the Press Complaints Commission, she moved with her husband to Liverpool, set up her own media consultancy business. They have 5 children, so she's a busy woman. Welcome, Alison.
Hi, good morning.
Quite a CV. Can we first of all try to explain to people exactly what the trust is? Because you don't run anything in a sense, do you?
No, we're the governing body of the BBC, and so we would set the overall direction for the BBC. We would sign off the budget for the BBC. What we don't do is employ the staff who work on the BBC, and we don't make the programmes or decide what it is that you listen to or watch every day.
But you can be critical of that, can't you?
Yes, definitely. And so what we do is we hold the BBC to account, but on behalf of licence fee payers. And so we would look at all of the services that they do and do quite in-depth research and reports on them, and then make recommendations to change. Praise where we think things are going well, criticise and look for actions where we think things need to be done differently.
Yes, I know you're doing one quite recently on local radio, which
Yes.
you just looked at local radio.
Yes.
I think you're doing something else at the moment, I'm not sure which.
We're just about to launch next week the latest one, which will be on popular music radio, so things like Radio 1, Radio 2. And we've recently finished one on news. We're just about to launch one on a report on television. So we look across all of the services that the BBC does. We ask the public what they think. There's a lot of consultation, do a lot of market research. They're in depth, and they do really then hold the BBC to account, and we then monitor ongoing whether that change that we've asked for is happening.
And the people who do this for you, and indeed the trust itself, you are separate from the BBC. You don't use BBC people to do this.
No, we have. We're under the umbrella of the BBC, and we're part of the BBC's budget. But we have our own office. We separate. We have our own staff. We have our own team. If the BBC's done some research and we think it would be useful, we wouldn't go away and do it as well, because that's just a waste of public money. So you're sensible about it, but we're much more separate than the previous governance system, which was the governors, and I think that's why the trust came. One of the reasons it came into effect was to be a bit more separate, so that it could hold it to account maybe a bit more transparently than people thought in the past.
Now what's your role with it? Obviously all the trustees do the same thing, but you all have specific roles, and yours is England.
So, well, there's 12 trustees. 4 of us have national responsibility. Obviously mine's quite big, because 84% of the population do reside in England, and you have that hat on sometimes, and sometimes you don't need to. I mean, lots of the other trustees live in England, so I don't feel that I'm the alone voice on England. But for example, I also chair the editorial standards committee. That's the place that the final complaints go to, so I spend quite a lot of time doing that as well. So we all do a variety of different things.
When you say the final complaints go to, we get lots of complaints already, so I don't know why. I have no idea why. But we do, and then they go to Sue Owen, our boss, first of all, and that bounces back, and then if they disagree, it goes to somebody else in London. Does it eventually come out of the BBC and into you? Yes,
we would be the third stage of those complaints. I mean, it's really, really narrowed down by the time it comes to us. You are 0.01% of original. I mean, last year I think the BBC got about 230,000 complaints.
Wow.
I mean, it's a chunky number.
Yeah.
We would see obviously far, far, far fewer than that, and sometimes they're the really high-profile ones. It's the panorama type programmes and complaints around that end up getting to us.
If you want to speak to Alison, give us a ring, 0151709 9333. At the moment, you're in a bit of a sort of funny place, aren't you? Because you haven't got a chair. Chris Batten is not well, had a heart operation, and has had to resign immediately.
Yes.
So you've got an acting chair.
We have. But Diane was one of the original trustees, Diane Coyle. She's been there for nearly 8 years now, so she's an incredibly safe pair of hands. She's an economist by background. She chaired one of the important committees. So from our perspective, well, it's very sad that Chris has had his health problems. It is really business as usual, to be honest.
But they are looking around. I'm not quite sure who they is, actually, but somebody is looking around.
The Department of Culture, Media and Sport have actually advertised.
Is that unusual?
Yes. No, that job would always be advertised. They're using headhunters, and again, that is not unusual. And I think one has to have expressed their interest in the role by the 20th of June. So actually not too, they're getting on with it.
I don't suppose I could apply. You've got to have fairly specific qualifications, I would have thought.
I think you could apply. I think anybody could apply.
Really?
Whether you potentially then, not you personally, Roger, but whether anyone gets through to the next stage is obviously...
a bit different.
Yes, I think, that they are looking for a certain set of credentials for that role.
Should it be a woman? We've never had a woman director, although we have at the moment an acting chair. We've never had a woman.
I am a woman, and I would always feel very warm towards women doing the senior jobs. However, I also think that it should be done on merit, and that the best person should be appointed to the job regardless. I was part of the interview panel for one of the previous Director Generals. That there were women on that interview panel. You would like them to potentially be appointed, but if they're not the best candidate at that time, then they certainly shouldn't get the job just because of that.
The word is that Sebastian Coe is sort of top of the list. Have you heard that little rumour?
Well, he was on the Victoria Derbyshire show this morning on 5 Live, which I did listen into, and she has a similar style to you, Roger, in their interviewing, that she's very tenacious but in a nice way. And she did, I would say, put him in the hot seat, and I would ask people to listen back if they're interested and see how that went, but he certainly didn't rule it out.
There are a lot of changes going on at the moment, which, just right, if you want to listen again, iPlayer 5 years ago, you couldn't have listened back to anything.
Exactly, which I've just dropped in, haven't I, in conversation, just listen back.
Absolutely.
And yet actually
it's become norm.
It has.
But there are a lot of other changes going on, though, which you must be involved in. The whole digital, the whole landscape is changing.
Yes, and I think there is a real expectation for the BBC that they've always had a reputation for 80, 90 years for being very forward-thinking on technology, and I think that rightly the public expect that to happen. Not necessarily to be right at the front and testing things where if there's a risk it goes wrong, public money's going to end. And we have had that in the past, yes, and we know what we're referring to. But on the other hand, you shouldn't be so scared of what's gone on, which means that you don't then carry on trying to pioneer, because otherwise we wouldn't have things like Freeview, which allows people who don't want to or can't afford to pay for extra paid television to still be able to access all those channels for free. We wouldn't have the wonderful iPlayer, which I think is held around the world as a real model of innovative technology, and just great for the public to be able to, you've missed something, everyone's talking about Happy Valley, oh my God, I missed it. I'm going to go onto the iPlayer and check it out and see why they're talking about it.
It was actually a lot of people were very critical of John Birt as Director General, but actually, or so John Birt as he is now, actually, he was the one, I think, who really saw the digital future and got things going.
He did, and he also, I come from a newspaper background, and we have taken years, and we're still slightly floundering, to get our heads around what to do with online. And John Birt, to his great credit, came up with a strategy for the BBC, and just because he's this kind of character, just got on with it. And it has meant that the BBC now is, I think, in a very strong position online, which is why I think sometimes the newspapers understandably worry about that, because they're far behind. But it was because one person saw the way the wind was blowing and went for it, with a lot of public money behind him, to be fair.
All right, we've got a first caller now on 01517099333. If you'd like to talk to Alison Hastings, the BBC trustee for England, and it's Jean from Kensington. Hello, Jean.
Hi, Roger. Thanks for letting me on. And hello, Alison. Thank you for taking the call. I appreciate it. Basically, I was just listening to what you were saying then about the online way forward, Alison, and I did miss a little bit because that's at the point when I was rung back to say I'd been successful to get through. What concerns me is with regards to the online thing at the moment, and I'm sorry to mention the other channels, but like ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, with the Freeview, I think that's important for anyone who's on a budget to be able to always have that forward. But going back to the BBC, you don't have the +1 facilities to be able to listen again, which those channels do. And if you want to watch a programme again, as you mentioned before there, say like with the Happy Valley. Now, I missed the second to last programme on that. And I'm cursing because it was a really, really good series. For anyone who's not seen it, who can do it online, then go forth with my blessing. But I'd like to be able to have had, the facility to have listened again like you have with the other channels.
Would you, on that, Jean, would you have been able to have watched that particular episode an hour later? Was it just the hour that was the issue?
Yes.
And did you think about trying to watch that episode on iPlayer? Because at the moment you would have had 7 days to have been able to have watched that.
Alison, I don't even know how to do any of that.
Okay. Well, let's talk later and I'll talk you through that.
I was going to say, this kind of like brings me round to my point of that. The other thing is, and I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate here as well, for people that are on low incomes or are getting older and can't sort of do things the same or can't process things the same. And Alison, you know, let's face it, we're all getting there.
Yeah.
Some of us are there a bit sooner than others. But as you get older, you get more and more forgetful. Technical stuff gets harder and harder. And you get used to a set routine, you get used to doing things a set way. And this is where, with the likes of the TV and the likes of the radio, it's what you're used to.
Yeah.
So the way you can program stuff, the way you can turn stuff on, the way you can turn over a channel, that's all key.
Yeah.
And given that the BBC, you know, we pay a licence fee to the BBC, and you don't to the other channels. I think the BBC is really missing out something here with not having those +1s. I can't understand why you haven't got it. I feel as if the people that maybe aren't online or are living on a budget are being penalised for that.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'd like to say is, with regards to the radio, you can listen to radio stations on the TV. But there's no BBC Radio Merseyside. And Alison, I've got to tell you now, BBC Radio Merseyside is a lifeline to a lot of people out in Liverpool. And it's a really good programme for the BBC. And if you ever back, and I mean, I know this isn't to do with you, I was listening to the way your particular organisation works, but you can certainly feed it back for me. As one little person out here, one little cog in the wheel, if they ever removed the BBC Radio Merseyside, I'd stop paying me TV licence fee and I'd stop watching TV.
Well, there's no worry there, if I can just reassure you on that. And just to pick up a couple of those points, because I think you make some really, really important points there, including on technology. Yeah. One of the things we often say around the table to the executive, because understandably they get really excited about all the new technology and the new ways of doing things, and they have to think about that because there are a lot of people who are choosing to watch and get their media differently. But we do say to them, don't forget that there are people who just want to watch it in the way that they always used to watch it. There's a big percentage of people in Liverpool who don't have broadband, and so they are not going to be able to download and stream great big programmes, and we do have to make sure that you get that balance right between the two. On the fact that
the other thing too with the broadband, don't forget as well, that's the other thing, and it's happening all the time in different organisations. Computers crash.
Yeah, and it can be frustrating. It's not always the greatest viewing experience. But just to reassure you on the +1, the executive have put forward a plan, or they will be in September, to have a +1 channel for BBC One. And it will be going out to consultation, and there are there's a big range of mixed views on whether that's the right thing to do. So if you do, and it sounds like you do, feel that would be the way forward, do get in touch with the consultation and put your view forward. I'm sure the executive would gratefully receive it, because they're keen to do it.
I don't even know how to go about round doing
we'll let
that.
people know.
Yeah, we can do.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that, because I feel really passionate about that.
Well, I'll definitely pass that back.
And the thing that concerns me, as I say, I'm sorry for repeating myself, is as you get older, you know, someone's got to stick up for people that can't do stuff for themselves the same way anymore. And it's key. And, you know, as much as I am a dinosaur, I love the age of digital technology, you know, the way it's gone with the TV, but please take on board the fact that, you know, our programming skills, as in like us cognitively, aren't always matched with the skills of technology.
Sure.
All right, Jean, very good to speak to you. Thank you very much for putting all that forward.
Yeah, thanks. And don't ever lose Roger.
I'll fall off a birch at some point, Jean.
Billy Butler. And I'd like to see his hours extended back to 2.5 hours.
All right, thanks
Get that in quickly. Thanks very much.
Thanks,
Good
Jean.
luck, Alison.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Jean. That's Jean there from Kensington. 0151709 9333 is the number if you want to speak to Alison Hastings, the trustee for England on the BBC Trust. This comes from Paul, an email from New Ferry, who says, my first comment is about the Mark Forrest All England show, which has been on air since January 2013. I personally, says, find the show rather boring, and Mark Forrest, while I have nothing against him, sounds rather bland. I was disappointed when the BBC chose to put out an All England show rather than having shared regional shows, which was already happening in the early evening in some regions. Surely it would have made more sense to do this throughout the whole country. The problem with the Mark Forrest show is it spends 3 hours doing what could easily be done in a 1 hour show. Also, separate point here, we have a 2-tier travel service, as we get what is effectively a national travel bulletin at hour, and then a rather brief travel update during the regional news bulletins at the top of the hour. Whilst I don't expect there to be local travel bulletins during the All England show, surely it would be better to have proper regional bulletins. I feel a national bulletin has no place on local radio. With the third point here, with regards to news bulletins, could you please tell me why the evening, regional and weekend local news bulletins are now 3 minutes long and not 5 as they used to be? Also, why is it that some BBC regions have news bulletins during a Saturday and Sunday evening, yet some BBC regions don't have any news after 4 or 5 at weekends? It seems to me a little inconsistent.
Okay.
4 points there, I think.
Yeah, and some of those, actually, to be fair, I'm not the right person to ask. I mean, there is somebody who runs English regional TV and radio called David Holdsworth, and he's very impressive, and I'm sure he'd be able to give a good answer to that. Just to give a bit of trust perspective on the newish show that's the All England show that email was referring to. I think the BBC ended up coming up with this plan because they had to save money. I mean, that is the bottom line. I don't think they would have made that choice normally. And the BBC, after the last licence fee settlement, has had to take 20% out of its budget. And you know, something will have to give. Their original plans to the Trust about where they were going to find this many millions of pounds was to take £15 million out of local radio, which you will remember here. And in fact, the listeners to Radio Merseyside were one of the more vociferous that we had, but we had a lot of feedback. We went out to consultation on it. I think, obviously, I had relatively strong views on that proposal anyway, and that was confirmed by the feedback that we got. And we went back to the executive and said, no, we are not prepared to sanction that. And we ended up with an £8.5 million cut to local radio. What the difference in that was that it preserved your daytime programmes. It meant that you didn't end up having to be more regional and share those. The executive came up with this plan to say when there are fewer listeners, between 7 and 10, that they would try this All England show. It is clearly not to everybody's tastes. Is it local radio in the old-fashioned sense? I can't say that it is. Does it achieve some savings in money, which was the aim? Yes. That listener, clearly it's not his cup of tea. Across England, the figures are relatively stable compared with what they were before, but you will always get pockets of people, absolutely understandably, who aren't keen.
And I think there may be quite a few of those in our area.
Yes.
It's settled. I think that the figures were low, and I think they've actually, at that point, and that they have begun to creep up.
Yeah, on your patch.
I only know the most figures. So generally speaking, it does sort of seem to be working out.
I mean, we do ask the executive regularly for feedback on the figures and how it's going, and it's work in progress. But as I say, no one, I think, is trying to pretend that this is something that they would have done for all the right editorial reasons. But when you have to lose 20% of the budget in any organisation, if we think about even our own household budgets, there is going to have an effect there.
Just announced this morning, I think, that 4 presenters on Radio 1 and Radio 1 Extra are all losing their jobs. Again, it's because of the cuts impinging on Radio 1. Now, they don't have to come to you to say we're going to fire these people.
No.
But they do have to come to you to say if they're making substantial changes in general.
That's right. And if they're doing something more strategic, I mean, it's absolutely the executive's choice as to who they employ and for how long. We make sure across the board that, for example, things like talent pay, that's reduced by 13% in the last 3 years, because that's something that we were concerned about senior pay, concerned about talent pay. So we can give overarching advice to say that has got to reduce, but we would never say, so get rid of that person or employ that person. That's not our job.
OK. Lenny in West Derby is ringing to say, what's the BBC doing about the poor sound quality on recent BBC dramas? Quirk is the most recent one, but there was a Jamaica Inn, I think, was the one.
That's right. And again, it sits in the operational side of the BBC, but we have, on behalf of licensed fee payers, because this was something that got a lot of complaints, particularly actually Jamaica in. We have had conversations with the BBC executive about it. I mean, they are obviously dreadfully disappointed, particularly with Jamaica in. This was a high-profile, expensive drama, and no one who's attached to the BBC, or particularly that programme, wants to go to bed at night realising that, that people are so unhappy with certain aspects of it. I think the BBC line, speaking for them, is that on that particular programme there were a range of issues. One of the things that interests me, actually, because we've had it again with the drama this week, Quirks,
right,
based in Ireland, is I've always been told at the BBC for years and years and years that in some parts of the BBC that people, the audience don't always like a really strong regional accent. They find it more difficult, and I always slightly bridle against that, intrinsically, because I don't think we have enough regional accents personally on the BBC, and maybe if we had more, it wouldn't freak people out so much if they suddenly heard a Brummie, because when do you ever? And I wonder whether in the mix of all of this that does play a part as well. So
we carried a piece the following 2 days later, which was with an academic who's making exactly that point.
Yeah.
That it's to do with stereotyping of accents and not really listening to the regional dialects.
Yeah. There's all sorts of reasons, apparently. I mean, I'm not a programme maker, but if you're wanting to make something quite gritty, often nowadays you wouldn't necessarily put the camera onto their face. You might be looking away, and actually, apparently, cognitively, we do need to read somebody's mouth, or read the lips, and if you put all of this together with a bit of mumbling, which I think
Jamaica
probably
was
didn't
very
help.
dark. It was lit very.
It was. So I think they are, really devastated, and but they have to get to grips with it. There is no point spending all this money on stuff and people not being able to hear it.
But you, as a trust, can be in a position to say, we are getting lots of complaints that people can't hear things, sort it.
Yes.
You can't tell them how to sort it, but you can tell them to sort it.
No, but on audibility, that is something that we've been talking to the executive about in all my time, which is nearly 8 years. So, there comes a time when you have to say, well, hang on a minute, we have... this has been one of these ongoing conversations. It has clearly... it went quiet and it's flared up again. Don't for a minute think that to your contributor there, don't for a minute think that this isn't quite high up on their agenda.
Sure. Next call is called Duncan. No, he's not. He's called Gordon, and he comes from Egberth. Hello, Gordon.
Hello.
Hi. What would you like to say to Alison?
Right, Alison. Want to ask you about the quiz programmes, Eggheads and Pointless. I can just say that I used to watch Pointless, but I've given up because he keeps repeating the same thing over and over again. So I've given up on that one. Now, I love watching Eggheads. What I want to know is who pays the money to the contestants when they win? Where does the money come from? That's my first question.
Okay, you want that answered, and then we'll go to a second question, yes?
Righty. The second question would be, do they pay travel expenses to the contestants?
Okay. Again, without trying to repeat myself, obviously I don't run the programming for the BBC. I imagine that the money would be part of the budget of that programme, and I think that's probably why you see the money that people win on the BBC is not copious sums. Certainly, if you compare that with maybe ITV, I think they're probably slightly more generous with their sums. So you don't see huge amounts of money, because I think you'd have to justify it to people like yourselves to say, well, I pay my licence fee and I don't want to see lots of people travelling around the world on cruises on the back of it. So that would come out of the budget for that programme. I can only imagine that they would pay for contestants to get to and from the studio. I don't think it would be down to somebody to do that themselves.
I thought the BBC was trying to save money.
Well, it does have to make programmes, so and it does have to make programmes. I appreciate you're saying that that some of these programmes maybe aren't anymore to your taste, but they do have to make programmes, and there is money involved in doing that. So I don't think the BBC has a huge amount of quizzes with a huge amount of money, but that would just be part of the costs of producing that programme, that for obviously a variety of people, they would enjoy it.
Yes, I enjoy watching Eggheads, and I used to watch Pointless. I don't see why it has to roll over.
The quiz prize?
Yes.
again, I'm assuming, because I'm not a programme maker, I'm assuming that they feel themselves that that's the best technique for that quiz. But do feel free, if you think it should be done differently, to write in and let them know.
I've no objection if it's £1,000 on eggheads for each one, because that makes every quiz team that's going on to contest against the eggheads equal opportunities. But I've realised watching it that when it starts to mount up like 8,000 or 9,000, it's always going to be one, and the questions then get very hard for the eggheads. I don't see why it can't be just 1,000. But in any case, a licence fee payer, on poor income, is subsidising these people that can win £9,000 and go off on a nice cruise.
Well, perhaps you should enter.
Yeah.
Have you thought?
It is an editorial decision. I mean, my wife, I don't watch it, but my wife watches Pointless, and my mother-in-law does, and they really, really enjoy it. And as the money builds up sometimes, then, it's quite exciting. And they're both licensed fee payers, so am I. I can't say it really bothers me that much. It more bothers me when I see, I don't know what the figures are going to be, but when the World Cup happens, there may be like 3,000 people from the BBC over there.
272.
Oh, all right, fair enough. Because you knew that would come up.
Well, I'm interested myself, because I think it's a valid question for people to ask.
An awful lot of people used to.
I think they really have looked very hard at trying to reduce. But on the other hand, if you think of this World Cup compared with last World Cup, they're sending fewer people, but they're doing twice as much coverage.
Yeah, because there's much more outlets.
Yes,
yeah.
My question wasn't about the World Cup.
I know it wasn't. So my apologies, Duncan. I changed it. But
what I was saying is, I thought they were supposed to be saving money, and for licence fee payers to be paying this money out. There's enough quizzes. There's enough in the papers, the lottery. We seem to be, the BBC have gone down the gambling now, because that's what it is.
Well, I'm not sure that's quite true.
Of course, it's a gamble, isn't it?
But it's entertainment.
It's it's not a gamble anyway. It's a competition. It's a quiz. You do have to have some skill attached to it. Particularly, presumably, eggheads. I mean, It's not one of my shows, but I'm assuming that they've got to be quite knowledgeable.
But you see, that's the point, isn't it, Gordon? Some people love something, some people hate the others. It's very difficult, I think, for the BBC to actually cover everything and be, No,
I'll be going now. My point was that I used to watch Pointless. It's the presenter that keeps repeating the same thing over and over again.
You are right, he does.
I will pass that back.
All right, Gordon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
That's Gordon from Egberth. Kathleen, you may not be able to answer this, I can't either. Kathleen in Smithdown Road area, Liverpool, wants to ask you, was Quirk made by the Irish broadcaster RTE?
I think it was a co-production with RTE, I think.
So it's the Irish that messed it up, Kathleen, that's what it was. It
certainly was shown on RTE at the same time, and I can only imagine if it was, it may have been that it was a co-production.
Fair enough. Our next caller is John from Ainsdale. Hello, John.
Yes, good afternoon, Alison.
Hi.
Basically, it's about, it makes a change to be able to speak to somebody from Central BBC who could probably answer the question. It's regarding complaints. Okay. I listened to what you had to say before. Interesting. Well, I don't believe the complaints are taken seriously. I'll tell you for why. I had a recent, first time ever I had to make a complaint regarding the Roger Phillips show. Don't worry. And it was somebody who kept phoning in, and her comments on every occasion were quite, to my mind, dangerous to all the people who listen to Roger. And I, sort of made a complaint to the effect that people should not be allowed to come on and make outrageous comments, which could be worrying. Now, I do understand everyone's entitled to their point of view, but there comes a time when especially when someone is a regular contributor to the programme, and Roger will probably know what she is going to say. Now, the letter I got back, the girl who took the complaint was very good. The letter I got back was very condescending.
Hang on, can I just ask you where you complained to first? Was it to us?
I spoke to Angela first.
Ah, right, yes.
While this particular person was on air, I spoke to Angela and I said, I've listened to this woman on several occasions and she is outrageous. And so much so that it can worry people for what they say. And it's the first time I've ever made a complaint in all my life. And I went on to the complaints helpline.
Yeah.
The young girl on there was fantastic. But the letter I got back from, I think it comes from Darlington, doesn't it, or something like that?
Was it Audience Services?
That's right.
Yeah.
It was condescending.
Would you know, I'd be really... Have you still got that letter,
No, I
John?
haven't, I'm
Okay.
afraid. I presume... the girl who took the phone call, in I don't know where it was, she spoke with an Irish accent.
Belfast is where they have... Yeah.
And she explained that everyone's entitled to their own opinion.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with that. But when someone comes on time after time after time and blurts out things that's horrendous... And old people who listen to Roger, and he has a good following of such age groups, they can frighten them. That's what bothered me most of all, is not what she was saying, but how old people could understand, would accept. But the letter I got back was quite condescending, and I wasn't impressed.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. I mean, one of the things often we do encourage people, and you did exactly the right thing, that you went through the sort of the Audience Services, which is the sort of the portal for the whole of the UK.
Yes.
On an issue such as this, and you did ring Angela, as I understand it, in the first place. I wonder whether, if you had spoken or written to the managing editor here at Radio Merseyside, who knows obviously the programme, who knows the team, who may even be aware presumably of this contributor, you probably would have got a much more localised, personalised, first-person response that you may not have been happy with, because they might just say, well, as you said, everyone's entitled to opinion, but you probably would have felt there was a different tone to it, which I think maybe would have made you feel a bit better about it.
Well, briefly, Angela was quite... very calculated. She said everyone's entitled to their own opinion, and that's all I got to my complaint. So I thought to myself, well, if that is how the programme producer thinks, what's the use of me talking to is it Sue, isn't it, who's the
yeah.
What's the use? If it had been Mick, the previous manager, who I knew, I think I would probably got a better response.
Well, you didn't speak to Sue, though. I mean, Sue would have given you a good response.
Yes, but I do understand, Roger, but I was so upset by what this woman said on the radio and what Angela said to me, and she's quite entitled. She was right. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. But when this contributor comes on all the time, ranting and raving about this and that, and you probably know who I'm talking about.
No, I don't actually, but don't say her name, please.
No, I wouldn't dare say her name. But last time that she was on, I think you nearly lost it. But I was so incensed by how her comments would affect older people.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that we do have callers who say outrageous things. I agree and understand what you're saying. I'm not sure it would have these things necessarily. It's more like I upset people by the way I row with people more than the contributors, I would have thought.
Yeah, well, yes, well, okay, I'll accept that, but that's part and parcel of your job, isn't it?
I think the point you make, which is useful for Alison, is the fact that you felt the response was condescending.
Yeah, and I've definitely taken a note of that.
You don't often get a chance to speak to somebody in
the upper echelons.
Yeah, the upper echelons of the BBC, and it makes a change. And as I was driving home before, and I heard you, and I heard what you said about complaints. So it's the first chance I have.
Well, no, and I'm particularly interested because that is one of my areas that I look after. So thank you for that, John.
But I've never ever had to make a complaint about the BBC before, but the letter I got back was quite condescending, you know.
Okay.
John, Sue Owen isn't here, she's away at the moment, but her assistant editor, who's, of course, Pauline McAdam, is here in the studio. Do you want to pick up on this?
Yeah, John, I would say...
Why is your mic not working very well? It should
Let's
be.
complain about the technicals.
Have a try on that one, Sue.
Hi, John. What I would say is, please always... The BBC does have a policy, you know, and you can escalate your complaint. What we would hope on the station, and this isn't to suggest that people don't then go further if they feel we haven't answered their question, I would always say come to us first. So if you've spoken to the programme producer, always ask for either my number or Sue's or our emails, and we will always get in touch. I spend quite a lot of my time writing to people who have complaints about Roger.
I'm not a complainer, you see.
No, and you see, the thing is, John, they're not complaints. I think they're conversations. So... quite often when somebody has a view about a programme and they will say, you know, I was very angry about this or I felt the other, then absolutely we should respect that view. And quite often what you want to have is a conversation with us, not some kind of, I take your point, not some kind of bland, I'm sorry that you felt.
Right.
You know, only this week I received 2 letters in the same post, one of which was very critical of an interview that happened on one of our programmes, and one of which criticised the presenter for not having gone far enough in holding the person to account. Completely polarised views. And in my reply, which, you know, may not satisfy the person, I was making that point. I was saying it's very difficult because you're going to think that what I'm saying is, well, you can't please all the people all of the time. But actually that's the case. However, it's really important that you keep in touch with us about this, not least because we can talk to you, we can do our own checks and balances, and it keeps us honest, bluntly. If you then think that we have disrespected you or we haven't taken it far enough, then I would always say take it further, you know, and we will give you the complaints procedure. I think in this instance, and I would suggest again, you know, hopefully you'll never feel the urge to complain, John, but if you do ring up, ask if you can talk to Sue or I. One of the nice things about local radio is you might actually just get a phone call from us. We tend not to, you know, we're quite happy to phone our listeners and talk because it's your station.
All right, John.
That's right. Thank you very much for your
Thank you, mate. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That's John there from Ainsdale. Tim from Birkenhead. Has the BBC let the Murdoch's press and the government bully it, leading to the licence fee freeze and cuts? As a corporation, it needs to be more assertive and stand up for itself. After all, it's better value for money than Sky. It's interesting that, because Tony Hall's talked a lot, that's the new Director General, talked a lot about being assertive and standing up, hasn't he?
Yes, and I think both with the BBC staff and people outside, there will be occasions where they think that, you know, the BBC hasn't stood up for itself. But it's very difficult because, on the other hand, you know, the BBC is often accused of not apologising quickly enough when it's made a mistake. So I suppose it's horses for courses, isn't it, depending on, you know, what the issue is. But, yeah, as you're right, the DG, there are times, I think, when the BBC should be really robust. One of the roles of the Trust is to protect the independence of the BBC, and we and myself take that very, very seriously. So if we do feel that there's encroachment by Parliament or by commercial rivals without a good point, we are there to protect the BBC by saying that ourselves, and we're very happy to do so.
OK, Jerry from Everton's our next caller. Hello, Jerry.
Hi, Rog.
Hi. What do you want to say to Alison?
Alison? Hi, Alison.
Hi.
I'd just like to ask you, you know, BBC World Service?
Yes.
It's obviously it's all over the world. Do they get television as well, the BBC service radio? Because that's all free for them over there. And how come the British licence fee payers, and they don't pay it when they receive it as well? I've never understood that.
So, well, until only very, very recently, the BBC didn't actually pay for the World Service, or if you go abroad and you turn on World News, you know, and it's or you're in America and there's a particular channel, the BBC didn't pay for that. That was paid for by straight through government, straight through the Foreign Office actually. And then, because they were presumably wanting to make their own savings at the government, they made the decision that the BBC would have to take responsibility for paying for that. And so you and I and everybody is now paying for a whole variety of things, actually, that we didn't used to pay for. And the World Service is one of those ones, actually, that probably the majority of people think, well, if we've got to pay for something that we didn't pay for before, we do think, actually, it's one of the ways where we showcase the BBC and the UK around the world in all sorts of difficult areas, and so most people that I've come across haven't been particularly unhappy about that. What they can't do abroad is pick up all the the television and radio stations that we all enjoy, because clearly they're not paying their £145.50. So, you know, if you live in I don't know, say Dubai, you can only get one BBC channel. What you can't do is sit down at 7:30 of an evening and watch EastEnders like the rest of us. So does that answer your question?
Well, in a way it does, yes. So in other words, it's just a news service, is it, free of charge for them?
Yes, so depending on where you are in the world, you might have a radio station, for example, that's run by the BBC. I think we're quite keen for parts of the world to have an impartial news service from the BBC. I mean, there's parts of the world where they just don't enjoy that. We take it for granted. You know, they are... Sorry, go on.
It's paid for by the British licence fee payers.
It is now. It is from April of this year. It wasn't in the past, and it's one of the things that the government said, we used to pay for it, but you know what, you can.
But why can't other governments and other countries that receive it Why can't they have
Well, in
their,
some... Interestingly, Jerry, in some parts of the world, that they don't want the BBC to be there because they'd rather have their own news service, which isn't impartial, telling everybody that everything that's going on in their place is wonderful, and they certainly wouldn't pay for the BBC. And as I say, in some places they try and scramble it so that their own citizens can't hear impartial news.
Oh, I understand that. Like, so in a way, it's worth it, isn't it?
Well,
for a couple of pence off each
yes, I mean,
getting the free.
Well, it is paid by tax. The taxpayer.
We were always paying for it, Jerry. You were always paying for it. It's just whether were you paying for it through your tax, or were you now paying for it through your licence fee?
Yeah, right. So it's like a free service, And also, one last question, please, Rog. You know when the celebrities, whatever they call celebrities, go abroad on these holiday programmes, and all they're doing is giving their opinion. How lovely it is, this and that. Why can't they have a conversation like every week or whenever they put it on, and have a conversation for the British licence fee payer to go on? Because they could just say the same as them instead of being a celebrity.
Yeah.
Why can't it be one of them and having a free holiday all paid for by the licence fee payer, taxpayer, instead of so-called celebrities?
I mean, that is a really interesting point. We do get lots of feedback from the audience that they are really acutely interested in the credentials of why somebody is presenting something. And if they feel that somebody has the right credentials, that they've got some expertise, if they're there for a reason, I think that everybody takes that in their stride. If they feel that somebody is there, as you say, just potentially because they're famous or in the know at that particular time, people generally actually don't like it. And I think the BBC does take that on board. You would see, I hope, a lot fewer of those kind of programmes fronted by those kinds of people on the BBC than you might see on other television channels, for the very reason that you're mentioning.
All right, Jerry. Gonna move it on.
Okay, Rog.
Thanks a lot, mate.
Thanks very much.
Pleasure.
Thanks. Bye.
Jerry from Everton there. Please ask your guest, says Jack, why Radio 5 Live is not available on FM so that it can be received on a car radio.
Yes, I find that very frustrating myself. I'm a 5 Live fan, and I think the further north you live, and certainly at night sometimes it's practically impossible for me to pick it up. So I feel your pain. It's to do with spectrum. There is not the spectrum for 5 Live to go on to FM. One hopes that because we are moving into the digital world on radio, I've got a DAB radio at home, and I bought it specifically for 5 Live so that I could hear it in much better quality. And once I think we start getting those radios into cars, and the manufacturers are now getting much better at doing that, hopefully this will be less of a problem. But 5 Live was launched quite a lot later than the other radio stations, and there just wasn't the spectrum, the bandwidth for them to go onto FM.
Richard from Allerton's our next caller. Hello, Richard.
Hi, Roger. Thanks for taking my call.
Pleasure.
Yeah, it's not a criticism of Alison, and you'll probably be surprised by that, Roger, but apart from the BBC's biased reporting particularly on politics and particularly trade union issues at times, like swapping the film at Orgreave and things like that, but leaving that to one side, I just think that the BBC overall as a corporation is extremely cheap for the service that they provide, both in radio and television. As I say, if you leave their little bias to one side. And I find that with people like Alison, who are eloquently spoken, but almost apologetic about the fact that we have this great service in Britain, and that we have to pay a licence fee, and it's unfortunate, and the others don't. We shouldn't be defensive about it. I think we should be quite proud about it, and the fact that if you look at the competition, whether it be ITV or whether it be the Sky channels or those sort of people, I don't see any comparison between what the BBC can produce, both in sport and politics and programmes and things. It's just unbelievable, and I don't see that, although I don't have Sky, and I wouldn't have them anyway because of Murdoch. But what I mean is, I just think that I know it's expensive, I know the licence is expensive, and to a lot of people, and just to me. But I just think if you look at the value for one compared to the other, I think we should be quite proud of what we've got in this country in that respect.
Oh, well, Richard, I'm sorry if I've come over as defensive. I'm very proud of the BBC. I do think, in general, it is good value for money. I have a role where, as well as being very proud, it is a bit like being a critical friend. So you just want to make sure that it doesn't get complacent. It's a very big organisation. It gets a very big budget. It's got a lot of staff, and we're just trying to keep it true to itself in some of the work that we do. But I don't think anybody would choose to be a trustee or put themselves forward for it if you didn't really, really believe in that whole public service ethos and that you weren't intensely proud of the BBC. And as I say, us trying to protect its independence is one of the most important things that I think we do.
Sorry, Alison, I wasn't trying to be critical and say you were defensive. What I meant was, I understand you people get bombarded from one end of the week to the other in any interviews, in any positions that you take. That obviously somebody at the back of the room will pop up about the licence fee and about the rubbish you produce for it and all the rest of it. And so I understand that it's a constant issue for people with inside the BBC. But I'm talking about people like myself. I think if we were all honest and looked at how much I don't know what it is. I mean, I pay mine by direct debit. Is it £3 a week? It works out.
Per person in each house, it's 3p a day.
Right. I mean, that's even less than what we pay for the Queen. I don't know whether the same bloke done the same calculations, by the way. But anyway, the point I'm making is that it's not cheap. It isn't cheap if you've got to go and find £100-odd. I understand that. But what I'm saying is, in comparison to what alternative there is, I don't want to be sitting watching an advert every 30 seconds, or what seems like 30 seconds, more advert than programme. We don't really want that.
And you are right, actually, when you do ask the public what it is that they love about the BBC, right up there in those top few things that they list is the fact that it's got no advertising on it.
Oh, that to me is, if you watch, I mean, I'm a big football fan, and obviously following one of the top teams in the country, Coventry City. But what I mean is that you can watch Sky in the sport, and they do good sport, don't get me wrong. But like, you look up and all of a sudden there's an advert again.
Yeah.
I mean, if you made a cup of tea every time there's an advert on Sky, you'd absolutely explode, wouldn't you?
You'd drown in tea. Richard, I need to move it on, but thank you very much indeed for your time.
All
really good speech. Cheers. Richard there from Alison. Just a nice little compliment for you, Pauline. Roger, would you like to say what a great response from Pauline, just showing how a local radio station should behave? I don't agree with caller John, as the person making these comments is making a personal statement, and if a listener is outraged, then call the programme. That's what the phone-in is for. And Neil says, to me the BBC is still king because of Radio Merseyside. Grant you that means my evenings are now less interesting, as I can't listen to that, and this is a word probably I shouldn't use, but what we put out then. Yet the BBC also allows people like John from Ainsdale to criticise another whose views I found refreshing at times. I knew who he meant. That said, my only qualm about the BBC is why, oh why, are we, the English taxpayers, still paying for Welsh television? I mean, I can understand why originally, but not now.
Well, actually, that's a bit like the World Service. The Welsh speaking television organisation, S4C, used to be paid by the government, so we paid for it through our taxes. And along with the World Service, it is one of the things that they've handed back to the BBC only in April of this year. So again, that does stretch the budgets, because you've got less money and you're taking on more responsibility. And again, if your contributor there is unhappy about that, feel free to speak to their parliamentarians about it.
Absolutely. Okay, we've got two calls to get in 5 minutes, and it's Dave from Toxteth first. Hello, Dave.
Hi, Roger. I'm sorry I don't know the woman's name.
She is called Alison Hastings.
Hi, Alison.
Hi.
Nice to speak to you. What it is, with regard to the situation with BBC Three, and they're trying to wind it down or put it on the internet rather than digital output. I'm not a watcher of BBC Three, but I'm an avid watcher of BBC Four. Yeah. And the reason why I'm mentioning this, I actually think BBC BBC Three should stay, and a lot of the output on BBC Two should go over to BBC Three. So therefore, BBC Four should shut down. However, the output from BBC Four should go on to BBC Two.
Yeah.
Because BBC Two originally was the highbrow, high art output for the BBC. Therefore, you've got rid of a fourth channel, and you've got 3 BBC outputs.
Okay, Dave, I want to cut you off there, but get a response, obviously, from Alison.
Yes, we're just about to publish our television review, and one of the things that you brought up, Dave, is something that we and the executive both are looking at the moment, which is, does BBC 4 dilute what BBC 2 was there to do originally?
Absolutely, I would concur exactly with that view.
And then, we haven't come to a conclusion about what you should do about it. But interestingly, the proposals that they've got for BBC Three, they're going out for public consultation towards the end of this year. I know that Roger and the team here will make sure that you guys all know about it. And if you have the views to say, I think you're doing the wrong thing with BBC Three, and apart from that, I think this is what you should be doing with 2 and 4, feed that forward. The BBC's your organisation, it's owned by the public. And when I say we do public consultations, it's not lip service. We really... we halved what local radio would have lost because of the public getting in touch with us and telling us what they think. So don't underestimate the power of yourselves to get involved with these consultations and put your views forward.
What's the protocol for that then? How would I document my outlook?
So when it's launched, which will be later on this year, there'll be a public consultation. You could respond by letter, but the easiest way, if you're able to do, would be there'll be a form on the internet that it will take you straight there, and they'll ask you some very specific questions, and then give you a chance to add anything that you don't think has been covered by that, and then that feeds straight back into our thinking at the Trust.
We'll definitely let people know about it, Dave, but I need to get on to a next and final caller,
All right then, fine.
Thanks, mate.
Bye now.
Cheers, bye-bye. Dave from Toxteth, and it's Tundi from Septon Park. Hello, Tundi.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you.
Tundi. I'm just calling to bring something to the notice of Alison.
Right.
I'm a performing, talented, disabled artist, and I've been trying to send some TV proposal to BBC and Channel 4 to try and give talented disabled artists a program as well, just similar to X Factor, where they can come on stage and perform and exhibit their talent as well, so as to be able to achieve their dreams in the music industry. Because there are a lot of barriers out there for talented disabled artists, and these are people that has gone extra lengths, to achieve their skills. You see blind people playing pianos, people playing guitars with their legs, and things like that, and the industry is too competitive for them. And I've sent a couple of proposals, because I had to go and train myself on how to write a TV proposal because of this issue. I have passion and enthusiasm for it. And personally, I'm asking, what can you do to help talented disabled artists to get on this platform as well, to achieve their dreams through the television program?
We're probably running out of time for us to go into a huge amount of detail of this, but it would be worth maybe you letting me know who you've sent that to. And it's not for me to tell the BBC what they should put on air, but I could certainly make sure that you're sending it to the right person in the first instance. I mean, you can imagine at the BBC they do get lots of people coming forward with ideas all the time, and there is a process, but they absolutely should look at what you're proposing and make sure that they come back to you.
Do you know who you sent it to, Tundi, or not?
So who would you direct me to, if you could?
Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We will get back in touch with you this afternoon, in fact, probably the next hour, and we'll tell you exactly who to get it to. All right?
All right, then. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Tundi, thanks for raising these important issues. Apologies to all, thanks for Tundi, Septon Park. Apologies to all who we can get through to. We'll dial us at some point in the future, get Alison back again to answer further questions. But thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Pleasure.
And responding to the wide variety of questions that came up. That's Alison Hastings, who is the trustee for England on the BBC Trust. And for next hour, it's up to me. You're going to have to just put up with me answering questions about that. Assistant editor looks very nervous now.
Local, national and international.